He stopped mid-sentence, microphone still hot, spotlight still burning because a woman in a short navy dress had just walked in. For a second, the whole ballroom froze. You could almost hear the air hold its breath. She didn't belong there, not with scuffed heels and a thrift store wrap, yet somehow she fit better than anyone else in the room. And as he stared, the words he'd rehearsed all week slipped away, replaced by one that came straight from somewhere raw and unguarded. We show up for one another, even when we don't think we belong here. No one knew then that those 12 words would unravel secrets, rewrite reputations, and stitch together two broken nights from very different lives. Because sometimes the story that begins with a glance across a crowded room isn't about falling in love. It's about learning to stay. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. Snowflakes drifted past the glass canopy of the brown palace like slow falling ash, each one catching the yellow glow of chandeliers before melting into the city night. The lobby hummed with violins, low laughter, and the sound of silver cutlery striking porcelain. In the center of that golden hush, a microphone waited. Grant Whitmore stood behind it, tall, measured, his charcoal suit pressed to the sharp lines of habit. For the past 6 years, he had opened this winter gala with the same calm authority, the same confident smile that said nothing could surprise him anymore. Tonight, his voice flowed evenly through the speakers, smooth as aged bourbon. He was talking about funding the new children's wing, about partnerships and data reports, safe, polished words. Then the revolving door sighed, letting in a gust of cold and a woman who seemed to bring the night in with her. Claire Addison paused at the threshold. Her breath hung in the air for a second, then disappeared into the warm light. The short navy dress she wore barely skimmed her knees, simple, thrift store cotton that caught the reflection of chandeliers and turned it elegant. A gray wool wrap hugged her shoulders. Her heels were scuffed, polished by hand until they looked almost new. No diamonds, no glitter, only a small tin heart resting against her collarbone, stamped with one word, "Stay." She hesitated near the coat check, aware of eyes turning her way. Everyone here seemed to shimmer, satin gowns, tuxedos, the easy posture of people who belonged. Claire adjusted her wrap and reminded herself that she was invited. The school board had given her this ticket for her volunteer work with the district's mental health program. Still, her stomach fluttered as she crossed the marble floor toward an empty seat near the back. From the stage, Grant's gaze lifted for the briefest moment and locked on her. He didn't know why his throat tightened. Maybe it was the color, that particular shade of navy that reminded him of the Pacific just before sunset, when his late wife used to watch the horizon. Or maybe it was something in Claire's stillness, the way she seemed both nervous and utterly present at once. Whatever it was, the practiced rhythm of his speech faltered. The words on the teleprompter blurred. A pause spread through the ballroom. Someone coughed. A waiter froze mid-pour. Grant caught himself, exhaled, and smiled as if the silence were intentional. "We show up for one another," he said slowly, his tone softer, realer, even when we don't think we belong here. A ripple passed through the crowd, half confusion, half admiration. The line wasn't in his notes. Cameras flashed. The pianist resumed, covering the awkward gap. Only Grant noticed the faint tremor in his own hand as he turned the page. Claire, seated now, felt the sentence land somewhere deep. Even when we don't think we belong here. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her clutch. The phrase was too exact, as if someone had peeled it out of her own thoughts. Dinner began. Glasses clinked. Polite laughter returned. Grant shook hands, posed for photos, spoke with the mayor. Yet every few minutes his eyes wandered back, scanning until he found the woman in the navy dress. Each time, she was listening, attentive but distant, as though her mind lived in a quieter room. When the auction started, Claire slipped away to the hallway, seeking a breath of air not scented with perfume and ambition. Through the arched windows, snowflakes still fell, gentler now, making the streetlights look like candle flames. She thought of her niece, Maddie, probably asleep on the couch with the TV still humming. Tomorrow they'd decorate the little tree, reuse last year's tinsel, maybe bake cookies if the power bill didn't swallow the grocery budget. She smiled at the thought, at the ordinariness of it, until a voice behind her said, "You found the only peaceful spot in this whole place." Grant had followed her without meaning to. Up close, he looked less like the magazine covers, more human, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, a weariness he no longer tried to hide. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he added. "Not at all," Claire said. Her voice carried the steady calm of someone used to listening more than speaking. "You were impressive up there, especially the part about belonging." Grant leaned against the marble column. That part wasn't planned. He glanced through the window. Sometimes plans fall apart for good reason. They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that eases the air between strangers. A violin swelled in the background. Through the doorway, dancers began to fill the floor. Claire checked her watch. "I should probably head back in before people notice the empty chair." He nodded, but his eyes stayed on her. "I'm glad you came tonight." "Me too," she said, though she wasn't sure why. Back inside, the lights seemed brighter, the noise sharper. As Claire returned to her table, she caught sight of her reflection in a mirrored column, dress a little too simple, hair pinned with a touch of haste. Yet somehow she looked right. She sat down, pretending to study the auction catalog. Across the room, Grant resumed his conversations, though his attention kept drifting toward the back of the hall. The night unfolded in polite fragments, laughter, toasts, flashes of silverware. But beneath it all ran an invisible thread, the memory of that unfinished line echoing between them. "We show up for one another, even when we don't think we belong here." And somewhere, under the crystal dome of the ballroom, both of them felt the faint pull of recognition, as if life had just shifted half an inch on its axis, subtle but irreversible. Outside, snow kept falling, tracing pale streaks against the glass. The morning before the gala had begun like every other, with the soft hiss of an old percolator and the pale gray light creeping across the kitchen tiles. Claire Addison stood at the counter in a flannel robe, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug while the coffee burbled. The heater clicked on, coughing warm air through the vents. 2 soccer shin guards sat drying there, balanced like little shields of plastic armor. Maddie had forgotten them again. But Claire didn't move them. She liked the small proof of life scattered around their modest duplex. 18 miles of highway stretched between home in Golden and the school district office where she worked. Every morning, she timed the drive with the rhythm of NPR headlines and the steam curling off her travel mug. Traffic lights blinked red, green, gold, and somewhere between the exits, she always said the same silent prayer, "Just let today be kind." At work, the hallways smelled of disinfectant and crayons. A teacher waved good morning. A student sat outside her office, eyes red from a fight with his father. Claire crouched beside him, voice soft and even. "You're not bad," she told him. "You just hurt. And when we hurt, we try to make someone else hold it for a minute. Let's not do that today." "Okay," the boy nodded. She sent him off to class with a granola bar and a sense that maybe adults weren't all useless. By noon, her inbox overflowed with referrals. She ate a sandwich at her desk, answering emails between bites. Bills at home waited inside a ceramic bowl near the fruit basket gas. Internet, medical copay. She'd pay them in a rotation she jokingly called the quiet arithmetic of good enough. 1 week, heat. Next, groceries. Somehow, they stayed afloat. That evening, after picking up Maddie from practice, they stopped by Good Threads, the thrift store on 10th Street. The dress had caught Claire's eye, navy cotton, simple lines, a hidden zipper that still worked. $8, discounted for a missing button. Maddie held it up against her. "You should go." "Aunt Claire, you never do anything fancy." Claire laughed. "It's not fancy if the dress costs less than lunch." "Still," Maddie said, "it's pretty. You deserve to be pretty sometimes." So Claire bought it. At home, she mended the button with thread pulled from an old sweater and pressed the wrinkles out with a towel over the ironing board. When she hung it by the door that night, she didn't see a symbol of daring, just something clean and hopeful. Now, in the echo of the gala, She stood near a model of the new Children's Behavioral Health Wing. The miniature hospital gleamed under glass. Tiny hallways lit by concealed bulbs. Names of donors shimmered on the plaque beside it. Claire traced one finger along the etched metal, whispering the surnames like foreign words. "Beautiful work, isn't it?" The voice behind her was quiet, familiar from the stage. Grant Whitmore had crossed the crowded room without the ripple of applause or the buzz that usually preceded him. His movements carried a measured restraint, the calm of someone careful not to startle the air. "It is," Claire said. "I wish the real hallways were always that bright." "They will be," he answered. "Eventually, eventually," she repeated, with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They stood side by side, watching tiny painted figures frozen mid-laughter inside the model courtyard. Grant's gaze drifted to the pendant resting against her collarbone, the small tin heart stamped with a single word, "Stay." He read aloud softly, "That's simple and heavy at the same time. What made you choose it?" Claire looked down at the charm, thumb brushing its dented edge. For a moment, the gala around them dimmed the music, the chatter, the scent of roses fading into memory. Her answer came slowly. It came from a night that tried to take too much. Grant's breath caught. He didn't press for more, sensing the border of a story not yet meant to be crossed, but something in her tone, steady, unsentimental, made him feel as if he'd been handed a map drawn in invisible ink. "Then I'm glad you did," he said quietly. "Stay. I mean," Claire looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time without the veil of distance. They were a shade lighter than she'd thought, the color of old blueprints faded by time. She smiled small, real, for a heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Around them, champagne glasses clinked. A photographer's flash burst white. The orchestra slid into a familiar Sinatra tune. Yet, in that tiny orbit of silence, it felt like they'd stepped outside the frame of the evening. "I should get back to my table," Claire said at last. "Of course," Grant replied, though part of him wanted to ask her to stay longer, to tell him more about that night, about what she'd had to survive. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you for coming tonight, Ms. Addison. The room's better for it." She gave a polite laugh. "You don't even know me." "Not yet," he said. The words surprised them both. Claire walked away toward the tables, her wrap brushing against the hem of her dress. Grant watched her go, noticing again the tin heart catching the light just a glint before it vanished into the crowd. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, snow continued to fall, soft and tireless, as if counting quietly the small, unremarkable miracles that keep people standing upright in the cold. The orchestra's first notes unfurled like silk, slow, deliberate, meant for couples who'd practiced the art of looking effortless. Grant Whitmore stood near the edge of the ballroom floor, half listening to a donor's story about Aspen chalets, when he saw Claire return from the hallway. The soft navy of her dress caught the amber light and moved with her like a tide rolling in. He excused himself before logic could intervene. Crossing the room, he stopped just short of her table. "It's a waltz," he said quietly. 3 steps, 2 turns. Not as dangerous as it looks. Claire blinked up at him, startled. Her first instinct was to laugh it off, but his tone carried no arrogance, only a kind of old-fashioned courtesy. "I haven't danced since. Well, it's been a while." "Then we'll both pretend to remember how." His hand extended steady, waiting. Around them, conversations thinned. People turned ever so slightly, drawn by curiosity. Claire could feel the air tighten like a thread pulled through fabric. Against every sensible impulse, she placed her hand in his. "Just once around the floor," she murmured. Grant smiled. "Just once." The orchestra swelled, and they began to move. His lead was sure, respectful. She followed, light but hesitant, watching her own feet until the rhythm carried her forward. After a moment, she risked looking up. "I suppose this is your element," she said. Grant shook his head. "My element involves spreadsheets and donor briefings. This," he glanced at the glittering crowd, "is theater." She laughed softly. "Then what does that make me?" "The comic relief. The reason the script just got interesting," he said. It was meant as charm, but it landed as truth. Claire flushed, unsure whether to pull away or lean into the moment. She chose humor instead. Be careful, Mr. Whitmore. Rumor travels faster than the music. I've survived worse rumors, he replied, turning her gently through the light. Their movement was smooth enough to look rehearsed, though neither of them had expected it. Each rotation drew more attention. Whispers slithered across tables like the rustle of silk. Who is she? Why, Claire heard the fragments, felt them graze her skin like cold air. She focused on counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 until it steadied her. Grant, sensing the shift in her posture, leaned in slightly. Ignore them, he said. I'm trying. Then try harder with me. She met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the noise fell away. There was no crowd, no orchestra, just the sound of her own pulse syncing with the rhythm beneath his hand. It was terrifying how easy it felt. When the song ended, polite applause followed, but it wasn't for them. A senator's wife had just arrived in a sequined gown. Claire exhaled, ready to step back. Grant still held her hand, though only loosely. Thank you, she said. For what? For not stepping on my feet. He grinned. You led half the time. I have a habit of doing that, she said, smiling despite herself. They walked toward the refreshment table, still drawing glances. Grant picked up 2 glasses of Cabernet, peace offering. Make it a small one, she teased. I'm driving. As they reached her table, a woman intercepted them, a tall blonde in a silver gown, the kind of beauty polished by money and confidence. Grant, she said, placing a hand on his arm. I didn't know you were giving dance lessons tonight. Valerie, he greeted, polite but distant. I was improvising. Valerie Rhodes, socialite, board member, and longtime fixture in Denver philanthropy circles. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were not. She turned to Claire. And you must be Claire Addison, Claire said, extending a hand. School counselor, volunteer for the district's wellness program. Ah, Valerie's gaze swept over the navy dress, the modest heels. Lovely to meet you. The words sounded rehearsed, like a line she'd used before on people she wouldn't remember tomorrow. Grant intervened gently. Claire's program is one of the recipients of tonight's funding. She does remarkable work. How generous of the foundation, Valerie said, lifting her glass. We could all use a little help now and then. The edge was thin, sharp enough to draw a reaction if Claire let it. Instead, she smiled. That's true. The world runs on small kindnesses. Valerie's eyebrow arched. Indeed. For a second, silence balanced like a coin about to fall. Then the waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and Valerie shifted her attention back to Grant. Are you attending the Aspen benefit next month? Still deciding. Well, save a dance for someone who remembers all the steps, she said lightly, and as she turned away, her elbow brushed Claire's wrap. A splash of red arced through the air, Cabernet, dark and immediate, staining the soft gray wool. Oh, Valerie exclaimed, I'm so terribly sorry. The tone dripped with honeyed control. Such a clumsy thing. I do hope it's not ruined. Claire dabbed at the fabric with a napkin. It'll wash, she said evenly, though her heart thudded against her ribs. Grant handed her a fresh linen cloth. Here, let me, I've got it. She met his eyes. Steady. It's fine. Across the room, the orchestra struck up another song, livelier this time. People returned to dancing, the moment already fading for everyone except the 3 of them. Valerie offered one last apologetic smile and glided away, her perfume lingering like frost. Grant lowered his voice. You don't have to stand here and smile through that. Claire managed a laugh. Dry and quiet. I've done worse for less pay. He stared at her for a second, then smiled a real one, faint and helpless. You're tougher than most people in this room. Necessity builds muscle, she said. He wanted to ask her 100 things where she found that composure, how long she'd been practicing it, but the band shifted tempo, and someone tapped his shoulder, reminding him of his next speech. Duty calls, she said. It always does, he replied. As he walked away, Claire pressed the napkin against the damp spot on her wrap, the red stain spreading into a faint violet halo. It looked almost beautiful in the light, like something transformed rather than spoiled. She caught herself smiling half defiance, half disbelief, then looked toward the stage where Grant was speaking again, calm and assured. But every time he glanced her way, she saw it the same quiet apology hiding behind his composure. She looked down at the stain once more, thinking how some marks don't wash out easily. Some shouldn't. The gala had thinned by half when Claire wandered toward the side gallery. The main ballroom still pulsed with laughter, but this hallway was quieter, lit by wall sconces shaped like lanterns. She followed the murmur of conversation until it faded into the soft hum of a projector looping donor slides. The display caught her eye, a glass case set against red velvet, labeled Voices We Serve. Inside lay a neat row of letters-folded pages, postcards, crayon drawings from children. A brass placard read, "Real words from real people whose lives you've changed." Claire leaned closer. Some were typed, some handwritten, a mosaic of gratitude and pain. She traced one envelope with her eyes a smudge of coffee on the corner, a return address long since faded. It reminded her of nights spent hunched over her small kitchen table, writing letters she never thought anyone read. Back when she'd been just Claire A., anonymous but desperate to be heard. She moved to the center panel, behind the glass. A red folder sat slightly open, showing a photocopied note printed on old stationery. In black serif font, the line stood out, "We don't have to fix the whole world today. Lower the ladder for one person." Claire's breath caught. She knew that sentence, not because it was famous, but because she had written it. It had been 7 years ago, after the district's funding for the student support line was cut. She'd written a letter to the Whitmore Foundation thanking them for an unrelated scholarship and adding, at the end, a single plea. "Please remember, even a small kindness keeps someone standing." She'd ended with that line her mother saying, passed down like a family recipe. Then she'd sealed it, mailed it, and forgotten it. Until now. A voice drifted behind her. "That line saved me once." Claire turned. Grant stood a few feet away, jacket unbuttoned, tie slightly loosened. The formality of the stage had melted from him, leaving something quieter. He nodded toward the folder. That quote, "Lower the ladder." I used it at a commencement speech years back. It stuck with me. Still does. Claire forced a small smile. "It's a good line. It's better than good. It's true." He stepped beside her, looking at the display with a faint crease between his brows. "I always wondered who wrote it. The letter had no full name, just a first name and an initial." Her heartbeat quickened. The room suddenly felt smaller, the light too direct. "Maybe that's how it should stay," she said, trying for a tone of detachment. Grant's head tilted slightly. "You sound like someone who's seen enough of the world to mean that." Claire kept her eyes on the glass. Sometimes names get in the way of messages. He studied her for a beat longer, then looked back at the folder. "You might be right. Still, whoever wrote it understood something about timing. That letter came during a year when I was, let's say, losing sight of why I started this work." His voice had softened. The cadence different, now slower, thoughtful. "Most people assume money fixes things. It doesn't. People do. Small ones. Mostly. Letters like this." Claire nodded, though words felt dangerous. The urge to confess pressed against her chest, but she swallowed it down. What would she even say? "That was me." No. It would sound self-serving. Or worse, like she'd come tonight for recognition. Grant glanced sideways. "You have that look like you understand what I'm talking about." "Maybe," she said quietly. "Counselors usually do." The remark startled her. "You know I'm a counselor. I read the guest list," he admitted. "You're here as a community honoree. School wellness programs. Right." Her laugh was small but genuine. "So that's why you crossed the room earlier. Research. I prefer the word curiosity. That's a polite disguise for research," she teased. He smiled, an actual, unguarded smile. "Then call it what you want." The orchestra drifted into a slower tune, and a few remaining couples swayed near the far end of the hall. For a moment, their reflections mingled in the glass, her navy dress beside his dark suit. Two strangers framed by a collage of other people's gratitude. Grant nodded toward the red folder again. "Funny thing about these letters," he said. "Every year, we choose one or two to display. I thought this one mattered because of the words. Now I'm starting to think it's because of the person behind them." Claire's throat tightened. She folded her arms, the tin heart at her collarbone pressing against her skin. "Maybe it's both," she managed. He studied her face, the kind of long, searching look that felt both kind and unbearable. "Have we met before, Ms. Addison?" The question was gentle but loaded. Claire shook her head. "Not that I recall." Grant nodded slowly, though doubt lingered behind his eyes. "Strange. I feel like I've heard your voice somewhere." Her pulse jumped. She busied herself smoothing the edge of her wrap. "I used to work for a helpline," she said quickly. "Maybe that's it. I talk to a lot of people." He smiled faintly. "Could be." But something in his gaze said he wasn't convinced. They stood there a while longer, silent, the hum of the gala thinning behind them. Then Grant straightened his jacket. "Well, whoever wrote that letter, if you ever meet her, tell her she changed more than one life." Claire looked up, eyes bright in the low light. "I'll tell her," she whispered. He smiled once more, nodded, and walked away to greet another guest, leaving her alone with the glass case and the words she had once written in the quiet of her kitchen, believing they would disappear into the void. Now they were framed under spotlights, quoted by a billionaire, shaping a world she'd never stepped into until tonight. Her reflection stared back from the glass. To Claire's one who wrote from struggle, one standing here in a borrowed dress. She touched the pendant at her throat and thought, maybe we both stayed. After all, the sound of applause rose again from the ballroom, calling the evening forward, but Claire lingered a few seconds longer, listening to her own pulse, steady and strange as if the night had just remembered her name. It started with a sound so small it barely deserved attention, the sharp click of a clasp, followed by a murmur at the far end of the ballroom. A few guests looked up from their desserts, puzzled, then returned to their conversations. But within minutes, the whisper had grown legs. By the time Claire returned from the side gallery, the music had softened to a background hum, and several heads were turning her way. She didn't understand why until she saw Valerie Rhodes standing near the coat room, a look of faint distress on her face, and one hand pressed dramatically against her chest. "My brooch," Valerie said to anyone who would listen. "It's gone. The ruby one, my grandmother's. I took it off when we danced earlier, right before dessert." Claire paused halfway to her seat, uncertain whether to approach or keep distance. Around her, conversations thinned into a thick, watchful silence. A security guard appeared from the hallway, carrying a tablet. "We checked the footage, ma'am," he told Valerie, his voice calm but low enough to suggest discomfort. "There's something, but it's unclear." "Unclear," Valerie repeated. "Either it's there or it's not." Grant, drawn by the commotion, crossed the floor. "What's going on?" Valerie turned toward him, relief blooming like she'd been waiting for the cue. "My brooch has been taken. I asked them to check the coat room camera." The guard hesitated, glancing between them. "The resolution's poor, only 480p, but we caught a brief movement near the coat rack around 9:45. A navy hem, a gray wrap." The person looked through her purse. Claire felt the eyes shift. Navy dress. Gray wrap. Her stomach tightened. "I went in there for chapstick," she said before anyone asked. Her voice sounded too loud, too plain. "I didn't touch anything else." Valerie's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Of course, dear. It's just that the timing. It's unfortunate." Grant's jaw flexed. "Let's see the clip." The guard reluctantly turned the tablet around. The video was grainy and dim, shot from a fixed corner. The coat room door swung open. A figure in a navy dress stepped inside, the shape blurred. She reached into her clutch, rummaged, then turned slightly. A hanger swayed behind her from a draft. Then the footage cut. "That's it?" Grant asked. The guard nodded. "Yes, sir." The timestamp matches the period Ms. Rhodes noticed the brooch missing. A low hum rippled through the room. Coincidence, whispered one voice. Convenient, murmured another. Claire felt the heat crawl up her neck. You think I took it? She asked quietly. Valerie lifted both hands, palms open in polite denial. No one's accusing you, dear. We're simply trying to be thorough. You were the last person seen in there. Surely you understand. Claire forced a breath. Then search me. Grant stepped forward. That won't be necessary. Valerie blinked. Grant, we have to do something. My grandmother's brooch. I said it won't be necessary. He repeated, calm but firm. If it's truly missing, we'll find it properly, not by trial in the middle of a fundraiser. The words landed with weight. A few guests looked down, suddenly fascinated by their champagne. The orchestra faltered mid-measure before picking up again. Softer. Claire wanted to disappear. The wrap still smelled faintly of Cabernet from earlier. Now it felt like a mark she couldn't wash off. I'll leave, she said, voice tight. You don't have to make a scene. Grant turned to her. No one's leaving, he said quietly. Not until this is fair. Something in his tone silenced the room more effectively than any shout could. He addressed the guard. You said the footage cuts off. Yes, sir. The system auto-reboots every 5 minutes. Then check the minute before and after. See who else entered. And Ms. Rhodes, he added, turning toward Valerie. Do you recall if anyone helped you remove the brooch earlier? Valerie hesitated. My assistant Kara was with me for a moment, but she left soon after. Then we'll start there, Grant said. His authority wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Claire stood still, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the parquet floor. Around her, murmurs began again, softer this time, redirected by Grant's composure. She heard words like unfortunate, awkward, shame. Each one felt like a pinprick against her skin. She wanted to cry, but years of practice had trained her otherwise. Instead, she straightened, smoothing the fold of her dress. I should go, she said again, quieter. I don't belong in this conversation. Grant's eyes found hers. You belong exactly where you're standing. For a second, the room seemed to stop breathing. Then he handed the tablet back to the guard. Review the full file. Send me everything. Ms. Addison isn't to be questioned further tonight. Valerie's face stiffened. Grant. He cut her off with a look. It's a piece of jewelry, not a verdict. Claire felt the smallest flicker of gratitude, mixed with embarrassment that he had to defend her at all. Thank you, she murmured, unsure if the words even reached him. He nodded once. Wait here. We'll clear this up. But she couldn't. The heat of so many glances pressed against her spine. Before he could stop her, she turned and stepped toward the exit, the sound of her heels echoing against marble like punctuation marks to a story she hadn't chosen to be part of. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. Grant stood at the center of the crowd, steady as a pillar, talking to the guard, to Valerie, to whoever else needed reminding that fairness wasn't optional. His silhouette was sharp against the light, but his eyes, when they found hers, held something gentler, apology, perhaps, or faith. She lowered her gaze, adjusted her wrap to hide the stain of wine, and walked into the corridor. The air outside was cooler, cleaner. Behind her, the ballroom resumed its slow murmur, the way gossip does when it thinks it's winning. Snow had thickened while they argued inside. By the time Claire reached the front steps of the brown palace, flakes drifted like white ash through the amber light. The doorman, startled by the abrupt exit, hurried to fetch her coat. She stood beneath the awning, arms folded against the cold, her breath ghosting into the night. Behind the heavy doors, the gala continued laughter, the muted thump of a bass line, the scrape of cutlery. It all sounded far away, like another world closing its gates. Grant followed a minute later. No entourage, no coat, just the same steady posture, though the corners of his expression had softened. Ms. Addison, he called quietly. She turned, her eyes bright from more than just the cold. You didn't have to come after me, I know, he said, but I wanted to. The street was slick with a thin layer of ice, the kind that made footsteps sound fragile. Taxis idled at the curb, their headlights slicing through flurries. This, she said, voice shaking, is why people like me don't come to rooms like that. It's never just about one mistake. It's the eyes, the whispers. You can feel it that moment when the air changes, and suddenly you're the story everyone wants to tell. Grant stood beside her. Not too close. You shouldn't have been the story tonight. I shouldn't have been there at all. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. They'll forget by morning, but I'll still be the woman in the navy dress with the missing brooch in her pocket. He hesitated, the falling snow catching in his hair. I didn't stop it soon enough. That's on me. Claire shook her head. You couldn't stop a room from being itself. Maybe not, he said, but I could have called the pause earlier. For a moment, they simply breathed, the night settling around them like an old quilt. Grant glanced toward the parking lane where a black sedan idled, exhaust curling upward. The driver stepped out, holding Claire's coat. She reached for it, murmured a thank you, and slid her arms through the sleeves. The wool felt heavier now, colder. She slipped her hands into the pockets for warmth, and then froze. Something hard brushed her fingers. Grant saw her expression change. What is it? Claire pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that holds jewelry, the color of deep wine. Her breath caught, the world tilted slightly. It was the ruby brooch. Her hand trembled. No. This isn't. Grant took a slow step closer, eyes fixed on the glint of red under the streetlight. Let me see. She held it out, palm open, as if it were something dangerous. The jewel gleamed, blood bright against her skin. I don't understand, she whispered. This wasn't here. I swear it wasn't. Grant's voice was calm, but tight. When did you last have the coat before dinner? I hung it in the cloakroom myself. She looked up at him, fear widening her eyes. Someone must have planted it, he finished softly. The word hung between them, sharp as the cold. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. The sound made Claire flinch. She looked down at the brooch again, its facets catching the streetlight like accusation. If they see this, they won't, Grant said. She searched his face. You believe me? He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the ballroom windows above them, golden squares flickering with silhouettes. Belief is easy, he said at last. Proof is what matters in that world. Her throat tightened. And if proof says I'm guilty, then I'll find new proof. The conviction in his voice startled her. He wasn't grandstanding. It was quiet, pragmatic. The tone of someone who'd already decided. Snow began to gather on her shoulders, melting into the fabric. She didn't notice. You shouldn't get involved. People will think people already think plenty. A gust of wind swept down the street, tugging at her hair, carrying the faint scent of pine from the wreaths along the lampposts. She looked away toward the crosswalk, where tire tracks etched dark lines into the snow. Do you ever wish you could be invisible? She asked suddenly. Grant exhaled, a thin fog between them. Every day, he said. But it doesn't work. Someone always looks. Then why stay in it? Because if I leave, the wrong ones keep the stage. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to. The city noise softened to a distant hum. The world felt reduced to the circle of light around them. Two figures in falling snow, both too aware of what couldn't be unsaid. Grant reached out a hand, not touching her, just steadying the air between them. You should go home. Get warm. Tomorrow we'll sort this out. Claire stared at the brooch again, then closed her fingers around it. If I walk back in there, it's over. They'll never believe this just appeared. Then don't walk back in, he said gently. Walk forward. She almost smiled at that almost. The driver cleared his throat, discreet, waiting by the car door. Grant looked at her once more. Keep the brooch tonight, he said. It's safer with you. I'll handle the rest. That's not how this works, she said. It's how it'll work now. For the first time since stepping outside, Claire felt warmth that didn't come from the coat. It was a fragile warmth, the kind born of being seen, not pitied. She slipped the velvet box back into her pocket. All right, she said softly. But if this ruins you, he interrupted, voice low. Reputation survives worse things than honesty. They stood for a moment longer, snow building on the brim of his hair. Her lashes. A car horn echoed faintly from somewhere down the street. The city kept moving, indifferent. Then Claire nodded, climbed into the back seat, and closed the door. Grant watched as the car pulled away, taillights glowing like small and defiant embers fading into the white. He stayed under the awning, watching until they disappeared. Then, without turning back to the glittering windows behind him, he whispered to no one in particular, "Let's make it fair." The snow swallowed his voice. Claire sat in her car for almost 20 minutes after leaving the Brown Palace, engine running, hands frozen around the steering wheel. The brooch rested in her lap, heavy and obscene against the faded fabric of her coat. She couldn't make herself touch it again. Every few seconds, her mind replayed the moment she'd found it, that flicker of red beneath her fingers, Grant's steady eyes, the way the word planted had hung between them. Her pulse thudded in her ears like a metronome gone wrong. At last, she took a breath that scraped her lungs and reached for her phone. Grant Whitmore. His voice came through low and composed, as if he'd expected the call. "I didn't take it," she said, before he could speak. "I swear to you, I didn't even know it was there." "I know," he answered. She froze. "You know I believe you," he said. "Not because I'm generous, because the story doesn't fit." Claire gripped the phone tighter. "They'll make it fit. Not if I move faster." The sound of typing filtered through the line. He was already working. "Where are you?" he asked. "Home." "Why?" "Because if that thing is still with you, it's evidence. And I'd rather be the one holding it than security." "Can I come by?" She hesitated. "You shouldn't." That's not an answer. The silence stretched until she exhaled. "Fine." 20 minutes. Grant arrived with the precision of someone used to keeping promises. He stepped inside her narrow entryway, bringing with him a faint swirl of cold air and the scent of city snow. Claire handed him the velvet box. "I haven't opened it since." He set it on the table, flipping the clasp. The brooch caught the lamplight, a heart-shaped ruby framed in gold filigree. "Same clasp Valerie mentioned," he murmured. "Broken hinge near the pin. That matches, too. So it's hers." Claire said, "Of course it is." Grant nodded, eyes sharp. "But the timing is wrong. Valerie reported it missing at 9:50. You entered the coat room at 9:45. That's a 5-minute gap. Too small for coincidence, too big for certainty." Claire sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over her. "So what now?" "We retrace." He opened his phone again, dialing someone named Mason, head of hotel security. "I need every access log from the coat room corridor," he said. Entry card scans, camera timestamps, catering badges between 9:30 and 10. Claire watched him pace her small living room like it was a boardroom. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "I do," he replied, "because what happened tonight was wrong, and because you walked out carrying someone else's sin." She didn't know how to answer that. Instead, she went to the kitchen, filled 2 mugs with coffee, and returned just as his phone buzzed with a reply. He scanned the message. 5 entries in that window. He read aloud, "Yours at 9:45. Valerie's assistant Kara at 9:34, 9:42, 9:51, and 9:59. 4 times Claire asked. He nodded. She said she was checking Valerie's coat. But no one checks the same coat every 10 minutes. Claire's heart thumped. She was carrying something. She recalled. A silver clutch. "I heard it snap shut near the dance floor." Grant's eyes met hers. "Describe it. Small, metallic. The kind that clicks like a metronome." He smiled faintly. Not from amusement, but recognition. "You just solved the first piece." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. It was Noah, the young coat room volunteer. He stood awkwardly, hat in hand, eyes darting between them. "Mr. Whitmore said you wanted to ask me something," he said. Grant motioned him in. "You were managing the coat room tonight." "Mostly." Miss Rhodes's assistant kept popping in, said she was checking on jewelry or something. She had that little silver clutch. Drove me crazy. That click, click, click. Like she was keeping time. Claire felt her stomach turn. Did she go near my coat? Noah nodded, uncertain. Yeah, I think so. She asked whose it was, then said she liked the fabric. I figured it was harmless. Grant's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to shift. Thank you, Noah, he said evenly. You've been helpful. The young man hesitated, guilt creeping into his voice. I didn't think anything of it till I saw her slip out early, before the speech ended. Didn't even wait for valet. Do you remember the time Grant asked, about 10:05? I checked my phone 'cause I was clocking out. Grant nodded once. Good. That's all I need for now. When Noah left, closing the door gently behind him, the room fell into heavy silence. Claire leaned back, pressing her palms over her face. So, she planted it. Why to embarrass me, not you? Grant said. Me. She looked at him, startled. You saw Valerie's reaction when I defended you, he explained. That was an annoyance, that was challenge. And Kara works for her. If she wanted to remind me who owns the room, that's how she'd do it. Public humiliation disguised as a misunderstanding. Claire shook her head slowly. All because you danced with someone like me. Grant's voice dropped. Because I noticed someone like you. The words settled in the air between them, quiet but heavy. Outside, snow brushed against the window, faint as static. Claire stared at the brooch glinting on the table, the thing that had almost destroyed her evening. What happens now? We get proof, he said. The hotel has hallway footage. If Kara passed through with that clutch, we'll see it. And if we don't, he smiled, but his eyes were serious. Then I'll find another ladder to climb down. I told you we'll make it fair. Claire wanted to argue, to tell him fairness was a luxury. But she couldn't. Something in his calm made her believe he meant it. She picked up the velvet box, closed it gently, and handed it back. Keep this, she said. If anyone asks, tell them the woman in the navy dress has had enough of other people's pockets. Grant accepted it, his hand brushing hers just long enough to leave a spark of warmth. You're braver than you think, he said. She smiled faintly. No, just tired. He gave a quiet laugh. They looked the same from a distance. For the first time all night, Claire felt the panic ease, replaced by something sharper determination. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The world looked scrubbed clean. For now, a blank page waiting for truth to write itself in black and white. The hallway outside the hotel ballroom had emptied into the hush that follows endings. The staff moved quietly, collecting glasses and stray napkins, their reflections ghosting across the marble floor. Grant waited by the elevator bank, coat over one arm, phone forgotten in his pocket. He'd spent the last hour reviewing camera logs with Mason, cross-checking timestamps until the pieces began to line up. Kara's silver clutch, the repeated entries, the hurried exit, the pattern was there. Still, his mind wasn't calm, not because of the scandal, but because of the woman who had walked out into the snow with her dignity intact and a velvet box burning a hole in her pocket. He caught sight of her now, Claire Addison, stepping out of the side elevator, hair damp from melted flakes, wrap folded neatly over one arm. She looked surprised to see him. I thought you'd gone home, she said. I tried, he answered. Didn't work. They both smiled a little at that, and for a moment, the tension softened. Grant motioned to the quiet corridor that led toward the conference wing. Come with me for a second, somewhere less. Gilded, she hesitated, then nodded. The two of them walked past framed photographs of mountain skylines, the carpet muffling their steps. Outside the windows, Denver's skyline shimmered under the thin silver of moonlight. They stopped near a small alcove where an antique bench sat beneath a chandelier dimmed to a low glow. The world beyond the glass felt miles away. Thank you for trusting me tonight, Grant said. You didn't have to. Claire shrugged. You didn't have to believe me either. I didn't believe, he corrected gently. I knew. The words landed softly like snowflakes that refused to melt. Claire looked away, her hand drifting unconsciously to the tin heart pendant resting against her collarbone. Grant noticed. That necklace again. He said, "You never told me where it came from." She traced the edge of it with her thumb, the small dent near the letter S. "It was made by one of my students' moms. She runs a craft stall at the farmer's market. I picked this one because of the word." "Stay," he murmured. "That word's been haunting me for years." She raised an eyebrow. "Haunting you." He nodded slowly. "After my wife died, I stopped sleeping. Nights stretched forever. One night must have been 3 in the morning. I drove up to Lookout Mountain. Just sat there, engine off, staring at city lights. It felt like the world had moved on and left me parked on the edge." He paused, hands loosely clasped. "I called a grief line. I don't even remember the number, just that someone answered. A woman. She didn't talk much, just listened. And before we hung up, she said one word. Twice. Claire's breath caught. Stay." He nodded. "Stay. Stay." He smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. It sounded simple, but it landed like a nail holding a plank in place. I drove home that night. Never forgot the voice, or the word. Claire's fingers tightened around the pendant. Her throat felt thick, her pulse loud. "That's a powerful coincidence." "Maybe not coincidence," he said. "Maybe connection." The air between them thinned, heavy with the kind of silence that demands honesty. Claire spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "What made you call that night?" He leaned back against the wall, eyes distant. "A voice on the radio," he said slowly. "It was some local segment. They were interviewing volunteers from a hotline program. One of them said people don't need fixing. They just need someone to be kind on purpose." That line stuck with me, so I called. Claire felt her chest tighten. She remembered that interview, the small recording studio, her trembling hands clutching the headset, the producer mouthing, "You're live." She'd said those exact words because she believed them, be kind on purpose. "Did it help?" she asked softly. He nodded, more than I deserved. A quiet minute passed. Claire looked down at her necklace again, at the word that had carried her through her own dark nights. "Funny thing," she said. "Sometimes I wear this when I need the reminder myself." Grant's eyes lingered on her. "Then I guess we both owe that word something." The corridor light flickered once, the hum of the building settling into stillness. Somewhere down the hall, a vacuum started up, muffled and distant. Claire looked up, meeting his gaze fully for the first time that night. "You know, I used to think words like that were just survival tools for other people, not for me." And now he asked. "Now I think they're promises we make without realizing it." Grant nodded, as if she'd articulated something he hadn't known he was waiting to hear. "You're good at that," he said quietly, "at what turning hurt into something that sounds like hope." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I think that's called coping." "Then keep coping," he said. "It looks good on you." Their smiles held, faint but true. The elevator bell chimed faintly down the hall, a reminder that the world outside still moved. "I should go," she said at last. "It's late. I'll walk you out. You've done enough walking for one night." He hesitated, then offered a small bow of concession. "Then promise me one thing." "What's that, stay?" The word hit her chest like deja vu soft. Inevitable. Claire touched the tin heart again, feeling its cool surface against her skin. "I think I already have," she said. Grant smiled, the kind that reached his eyes this time. Neither of them moved for a while, letting the stillness settle around them. Outside the window, the city glittered quietly, not in celebration, but in survival. Morning came pale and brittle, light refracted through frost on the window. Claire hadn't really slept. The sound of snowplows on the street had folded into the rhythm of her own pulse, steady but unrelenting. On the coffee table sat 2 mugs of untouched tea and a velvet box she wished she'd never seen. At exactly 8, her phone buzzed. Grant. "Check your email." The message read, "I think we have something." She opened her laptop, fingers trembling slightly. An email from his office appeared, subject line "Coatroom Access Log." The attached images were screenshots from a security database, lines of timestamps and ID tags. A knock followed moments later. Grant himself stood on her porch, wrapped in a black overcoat dusted with melting snow. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I brought breakfast," he said, holding up 2 paper cups and a bag that smelled like cinnamon and butter. "You didn't have to," she said, stepping aside. "I didn't want to waste time texting what I can show you." They sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she'd written her letter years ago. Grant laid his phone between them, scrolling through the images. "These are from Mason," he explained, every keycard ping between 9:30 and 10:15. "Yours once, at 9:45, Kara's 4 times, and this." He pointed to a final entry at 2:14 a.m. Claire frowned. "That's hours later." "Exactly," Grant said. The catering corridor door opened, then badge registered to housekeeping, but housekeeping didn't start until 6. "So, someone went back," she murmured. He nodded, probably to retrieve what they'd hidden. "After realizing you'd taken the coat home." Claire stared at the log again. The numbers looked cold, mechanical, but they hummed with implication. "You think Kara planted it, then came back for it. I think Valerie asked her to clean up the mess, and she didn't get the chance." For the first time since the gala, Claire felt her lungs expand fully. "That's something." "Breadcrumbs," Grant said. "Enough to follow." She leaned closer, studying the grainy screenshot of the timestamp. "What about audio? The clip from the coat room, did it have sound?" Grant looked up, faintly. "Why?" "Because Valerie's assistant wore stilettos with metal taps. I remember hearing them when she passed behind me, that double click-click. It's distinctive." He unlocked his phone again, pulled up the coat room video. The pixelated image played out a navy hem, a gust from the door, the swaying hanger, faint under the static. 2 crisp taps echoed on tile, then silence. "There," Claire said, pointing. "You hear it." Grant replayed the few seconds, listening harder. Tap, tap. "That's not your heel." "I was wearing rubber soles," she said. Grant smiled faintly, the first real smile of the morning. "Good catch." She exhaled a shaky laugh. "It's weird, isn't it? I'm usually the one telling kids to look for details, not chasing them myself." He studied her a moment. "You're better at this than you think." She shrugged, but her cheeks flushed. Desperation improves focus. Grant's expression softened. "Maybe. But you notice things most people miss. That's not desperation. That's instinct." For a while, they worked in silence, 2 cups of coffee cooling beside the laptop. Outside, the city was waking, cars scraping ice from windshields, dogs barking somewhere down the block. The ordinary world carried on, indifferent to small injustices. Grant tapped his screen again, switching to another message. "Mason says the back hall camera might show more. It's an older model, but it covers the service corridor connecting to the coat room. I'm calling the hotel's night manager." He put the call on speaker. The voice that answered was brisk, polite. "Brown Palace, this is Linda." "Linda, it's Grant Whitmore. I need access to your security archive, specifically the back hall feed between 9:30 and 10:30 last night." A pause crackled through the line. "Those are internal areas. Mr. Whitmore, normally I'd need a warrant. You'll have a foundation subpoena by noon," he said evenly. "But if you help now, I'll make sure the staff bonus fund gets a small miracle this quarter." Another pause. "Then I'll send the file within the hour." "Thank you," Grant said, and ended the call. Claire looked at him, half impressed, half uneasy. "You're used to getting what you want." He smiled faintly. "No. I'm used to asking until the right person realizes I won't stop." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. But some things are worth it." Her eyes met his for a beat too long before she looked away, focusing on the screen again. "If this footage shows what we think, then what you tell Valerie she's been outed." "Not yet," he said. "People like her don't apologize. They reposition. I'd rather let the truth find her before she can hide from it." Claire took a bite of her muffin just to have something to do. "You talk like you're used to fighting quiet wars." He chuckled softly. "You talk like you've survived them." The comment hung there, not a compliment, not quite a confession. When the email arrived, Grant opened it immediately. A grainy still appeared the service corridor. Timestamp 9:42 p.m. The lighting was dim, the figure blurred but feminine. The silhouette of a silver clutch glinted briefly as she turned the corner. "That's her," Claire whispered. "Kara." Grant zoomed in, enhancing the frame until the clutch filled the screen. The clasp shone bright under the security light, two metal corners, sharp as little teeth. "She went in before you," he said. "That's the setup." He flipped to another still, "Your 9:51 p.m. Same hallway, same woman. This time, she carried nothing." Grant exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in hours. "There it is." Claire leaned back, the smallest sound of relief slipping from her lips. "You just proved I wasn't crazy. I never thought you were," he said. The way he said it quiet, certain, made her throat tighten. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." She smiled, small, but real. "You know, for a billionaire, you're surprisingly human." "Don't tell anyone," he said, smiling back. "I've got a reputation." The laughter that followed was soft, short-lived, but it felt good, like the first warmth after a long frost. Outside, the day had brightened into a clean, glassy cold. Sunlight bounced off the snow, turning everything to gold for a moment. Grant glanced at the screen again, the frozen image of Kara mid-stride. "We're almost there," he said quietly. "One more breadcrumb." And then Claire asked, "Then we give the story back to the right person." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the window where sunlight caught her pendant, stay flashing once like a heartbeat before fading again. Neither of them noticed the way their reflections overlapped in the glass, two silhouettes beginning to move in the same rhythm toward something that finally looked like truth. By noon, the air in Denver felt sharper, the kind of brittle cold that makes sunlight look metallic. Grant and Claire sat in the conference room of the Whitmore Foundation's downtown office, blinds half drawn against the glare. On the table between them, his phone screen glowed with a frozen frame from the hotel's back hall footage. It showed a woman, Kara, Valerie Rhodes' assistant, in that unmistakable sequined jacket, hair twisted tight, head tilted as she slipped her hand into the sleeve of a navy coat. Grant tapped the play icon. The footage rolled forward. Kara's hand withdrew. Fingers curled around a small velvet box, which she tucked smoothly into the inner lining of her own purse. One practiced motion, like someone who'd done this kind of thing before. Claire's breath came shallow. She really did it. He nodded once, and she came back at to erase the evidence. Only Mason's system archived to a backup drive she didn't know existed. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the building heating vents, distant traffic filled the silence. Claire finally exhaled, voice shaking. "I kept thinking maybe it was some mistake, like the universe misplaced something and picked me as the punchline." Grant turned the phone face down on the table. "It wasn't you. It was power trying to stay comfortable." Before she could answer, the door opened. Valerie Rhodes swept in, wrapped in winter white, her perfume cutting through the air like expensive anesthesia. Kara trailed behind her, pale and tight-lipped. "Grant," Valerie said, tone brisk. "I hear you've been playing detective. I thought we might settle this before gossip gets there first." "Then let's do that," he said evenly. Claire rose halfway, uncertain, but Grant gestured for her to sit. Valerie placed her gloves on the table with precision. "There's been confusion. My assistant acted on poor judgment. She thought my jewelry had fallen, and Grant interrupted, his voice calm but razor-thin, and she planted it in someone else's coat." Valerie's smile barely flickered. "The footage is unfortunate. But must we dramatize?" She panicked. Kara's eyes dropped to the carpet. "Ms. Rhodes." Valerie cut her off with a raised hand. "Not now." Grant leaned forward. "No, now is fine. The room deserves honesty, not choreography." The quiet that followed had weight. Even the hum of the vent seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Valerie sighed, the sound of someone pretending surrender. "What do you want?" "Grant a headline, I can handle that. Or an apology. Name the script." "I want two things," he said. His tone didn't rise, but the steel in it made even Kara glance up. "First, That brooch will be returned publicly to you in the same ballroom it was lost. And second, a donation will be made to the children's behavioral wing in Ms. Addison's name, equal to the brooch's appraised value. Valerie blinked. That's extortion. It's restitution, Grant said. And, if you're worried about optics, call it philanthropy. Her eyes narrowed. And if I refuse, he smiled faintly. Then the footage leaves this room within the hour. Every donor on your contact list will see what confusion looks like. Valerie studied him for a long moment, weighing cost against vanity. Claire could almost hear the calculations whirring behind that flawless expression, the arithmetic of self-preservation. Finally, Valerie exhaled through her nose. "Fine," she said, "but I'll write the check. The assistant will return the brooch. That should satisfy your moral math." Grant glanced at Kara, whose hands twisted nervously. "She deserves her own voice," he said. Kara swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Ms. Rhodes said she needed help, said it was a misunderstanding that had to look convincing. I thought it would blow over." Claire watched the young woman. Not angry now, just tired. "It nearly did," she said quietly. "But things like this don't stay buried. They bruise." Grant pushed his chair back slightly. "We'll meet at the Brown Palace at 6. Same room. I'll bring the check paperwork. You'll bring the brooch. And Ms. Addison will get the acknowledgement she was denied." Valerie rose, smoothing her coat. "You always did love your stage, Grant." He met her gaze. "No. Valerie, I just hate watching people like you rewrite truth while everyone blinks." She stiffened, but said nothing. Then she turned, heels clicking against marble, Kara trailing silently behind. When the door closed, Claire let out a shaky laugh that was half disbelief. "You really think she'll go through with it?" "Yes," Grant said, "because reputation is her religion. She'll tithe whatever it takes to stay holy in public." Claire looked down at her hands. "You didn't have to make it about me. I didn't," he said softly. "You were always the point. They just forgot what decency looks like until someone reminded them." The words landed deep, steadying her in ways she didn't expect. She leaned back, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding since the gala. "You know, when I wrote that letter years ago, the one you quoted, I never imagined it would circle back like this." Grant smiled faintly. Letters have long memories. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sunlight angling through the blinds in slow stripes. Outside, snow melted from the awnings, dripping like the tick of a metronome, proof that even frozen things learned to move again. Finally, Claire stood. "If this actually happens tonight, what then? Then you go home." Grant said, "You keep doing what you already do, lowering ladders, one person at a time, and you." He hesitated, a flicker of weariness crossing his features. "Maybe I start climbing down a few myself." She smiled soft, uncertain. "Try not to fall." He chuckled. "I'll call you if I do." When she left, the room felt lighter, though the air still carried the echo of what had been said, truth rearranging itself quietly into balance. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the glass towers. Inside, Grant reopened the footage one last time, watching the frame where Kara's hand slipped the box into the coat. Then he paused it right before the act, when everything still looked ordinary. He stared at that frozen second and murmured to himself, almost as a prayer, "It always happens when people blink." By evening, the Brown Palace glowed again, all chandeliers and chatter, as if the previous night had never happened. The same donors gathered, though their laughter was thinner now, stretched across the unspoken rumor that had swept through town before lunch and somehow circled back by dinner. Denver was a city that liked its gossip tidy. Claire stood near the edge of the ballroom balcony, looking down at the tables below. Her wrap had been cleaned, the faint wine stain now barely visible, like a scar that refused to fade completely. She felt oddly calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've run out of room to care what people think. Grant stood a few feet away, conferring quietly with the event coordinator. He'd kept his promise. The brooch would be returned publicly, the donation signed and sealed, and her name would be spoken aloud without a trace of pity. When he looked over, she nodded once. "I'm ready." A chime rang through the room, calling for attention. Valerie Rhodes appeared at the microphone, impeccable in cream satin, smile fixed like porcelain. Cameras shifted subtly. The world, once again, was her audience. "Good evening," she began, her voice honeyed, rehearsed. "Before we continue tonight's program, I'd like to address a small misunderstanding from last night's gala." Small, Claire thought. Funny how people with power could shrink disaster into a word you could swallow without choking. Valerie continued, "It seems that in the flurry of excitement, one of my family pieces was misplaced. Fortunately, our diligent staff located it this morning safe and sound. I want to personally thank Mr. Whitmore and the foundation team for their swift and thoughtful attention." She paused for applause that came politely, but without conviction. "And, of course," she added, her gaze landing on Claire, "I'd like to extend my appreciation to Ms. Addison for her grace throughout this silly mix-up. It's a reminder that charity begins with understanding. Understanding." The word slid across the marble floor like a dropped coin, shiny, empty, noisy. Grant's jaw tightened. Claire felt his gaze, waiting for her to respond, to claim her truth. She could, right here, right now. She could tell the room about the footage, about the assistant, about how Valerie's apology was a veil woven from fear and spin. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward, voice steady and warm enough to hush the whispers. "Thank you, Ms. Rhodes," she said. "And thank you to everyone here for the chance to clear the air. I think we all know how easy it is for details to get tangled when good intentions move too fast." A few people nodded, unsure whether it was safe to smile. She continued, "I work with students who make mistakes every day. I tell them that what matters most isn't the error, but what they do next. Tonight, I'm choosing to do what I ask them to do: show up, learn, and move forward." The words hung there, quiet but heavy, sinking deeper than any accusation could. A murmur rippled through the crowd, softer this time, almost reverent. A donor at table 3 started clapping, and within seconds, the room followed. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. Claire felt it like a slow, steady heartbeat. Grant stepped toward her, his expression unreadable, pride hiding behind restraint. "That was—" He began. "Enough," she said, smiling. He nodded. "More than—" Valerie retreated to the side of the stage, face frozen in a perfect social smile. Kara stood behind her, pale, hands clasped tight. Claire met the young woman's eyes briefly, not with vengeance, but a kind of weary forgiveness. The girl looked down, ashamed. The MC took the stage to announce the next segment, a ceremonial check presentation. Grant walked forward, handed the oversized envelope to the foundation treasurer, and cleared his throat. "This contribution," he said, "comes from a friend of the foundation. Its purpose is to remind us that when harm is done, repair matters more than denial. It will fund art therapy and crisis outreach for the children's behavioral wing, in honor of one of the most dedicated counselors I've ever met, Ms. Claire Addison." Applause again, stronger this time. The spotlight caught her, soft but undeniable. Claire felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, but she stayed because this moment wasn't about her comfort. It was about reclaiming space without needing permission. After the check presentation, Grant approached her, extending his arm. "Shall we go back in? You've earned every eye in the room tonight." Claire looked at the offered arm, the polished kindness behind it. For a heartbeat, she considered it the ease of letting someone guide her back into the noise, to share the light of vindication. But something inside her said not yet. "Thank you," she said softly, "but not tonight." Grant tilted his head. "Because you don't want to be seen walking beside me, because I don't need to," she replied. "Not for this." He studied her, then smiled the kind of smile that meant he understood perfectly. Then I'll walk a few steps behind. Deal." Claire turned toward the balcony doors. The air outside was crisp, the city shimmering below like a field of glass. She gripped the railing, breathing in the cold. Behind her, the faint echo of music drifted through the open doors' violins. Soft conversation, the comfortable hum of a world that would soon forget the scandal it had almost made. She wouldn't forget, though, not the sting, not the humiliation, not the kindness that had stitched her back together. Inside, Grant lingered near the entrance, watching her silhouette against the night. He didn't follow, didn't interrupt. For the first time, he realized what true dignity looked like, the grace to stay standing when everyone else is blinking. And for the first time in years, Claire felt her pulse slow to a calm rhythm, steady, proud, untangled. The city lights below flickered, wind stirring the edge of her wrap. Somewhere deep inside, she thought she heard her mother's voice again. Stay. This time, she didn't need the reminder. By Tuesday afternoon, the snow had thinned to slush, and sunlight dripped through the school windows like melted glass. The hallway outside the counseling office smelled of wet mittens and cafeteria pizza. Backpacks leaned in puddles against lockers. Claire sat at her desk, sorting permission slips and fielding two students who were arguing over who'd lost the chess club's queen piece. It was her favorite kind of noise, ordinary, human, redeeming. When the last bell rang, the office exhaled into stillness. She gathered her papers, straightened a stack of folders, and reached for the small bulletin board behind her. Tacked to it was a faded scrap of paper, her own handwriting, scrawled years ago on a post-it, yellowed by time. We don't have to fix the whole world today. Lower the ladder for one person. She'd kept it there as a reminder. Not of her words, she'd forgotten they were hers, but of what they meant. The knock at her door was gentle, deliberate. "Come in," she said without looking up. Grant Whitmore stepped inside, snow melting from the shoulders of his coat. He looked almost out of place among the college posters and construction paper art, but the warmth of the room softened his edges. "You found me," Claire said, standing. "Again. I'm good at maps," he replied with a half-smile. "And I had a reason." He held up a slim red folder, the same color as the display case from the gala. Inside, a photocopy peeked out. "I wanted to return something that belongs to you," he said. Claire frowned. "I don't think the school accepts jewelry deposits anymore." He chuckled softly and set the folder on her desk. No jewelry this time, just a letter. She opened the folder, and there it was, cream stationery, typed and slightly smudged from years of handling. At the bottom, Claire A. Her breath caught. "You kept it." Grant nodded. It sat in the Foundation archives for a while. "I asked my staff to find the original after that night. The handwriting on the envelope matched the note on your bulletin board." He pointed toward the little square pinned above her desk. "Same words." Claire's throat tightened. "I never thought anyone read it." "I did," he said quietly. 5 years ago. I was reviewing a scholarship audit, ready to cancel our travel stipends to cut costs. Then I came across your line, 'Lower the ladder for one person.' It stopped me. I couldn't shake it." He leaned against the edge of her desk, voice soft but steady. "Because of that sentence, we rewrote the policy. We kept the stipends. That year, 147 students used that money to get to their interviews. Most of them wouldn't have gone otherwise." Claire stared at him, her eyes shining in disbelief. "You're telling me I'm telling you," he interrupted gently, "that your letter moved a mountain I didn't even realize I was standing on." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of melting snow from students' boots outside echoed faintly in the hallway. Like a metronome keeping time for a truth finally catching up, Claire reached for the page, her fingertips brushing the words she'd written in a kitchen with one flickering bulb. Years ago, thinking it would vanish into some unread pile. "I wrote this after a student told me she couldn't afford gas to her college interview. She said, I sent the letter because I was angry, not wise. Maybe they're the same thing." Grant said, "Anger with hope inside it, that's what changes things." She laughed through a tear that slipped down her cheek. "One letter, one night, and you remembered it all this time. I didn't remember the name." He admitted, just the voice. That line made her pause. She thought back to the night he'd confessed about the grief call, the woman who told him to stay. Maybe he hadn't recognized the voice on the phone then, but the words had stayed, like seeds in frost waiting for spring. Claire blinked fast, trying to hide how her eyes blurred. "You didn't have to tell me this." "I did," Grant said, "because you should know that your quiet work mattered long before that ballroom noticed you. You already made the world fairer. I just got the memo late." Her laugh cracked slightly. "You're giving me too much credit." "No," he said simply. "I'm giving you the right amount." The room filled with a still warmth that didn't need words. Claire sat back, the letter in her lap, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself cry, not out of shame or exhaustion, but because proof of goodness had finally circled home. When she looked up, Grant was watching her with that same gentle steadiness. "You know," she said, wiping her cheek, "this feels like the universe trying to say stay again." He smiled. "Then I'm listening." Outside, a group of students ran past the window, kicking slush at each other, shrieking laughter into the cold. One of them slipped. The others stopped to help him up. Claire watched them with a small smile. "There it is," she whispered. "What the ladder? They just keep lowering it for each other." Grant followed her gaze. Maybe that's all any of us are supposed to do. He stood, buttoning his coat. "I'll leave you with the letter. It belongs here more than in a file." As he turned to go, Claire said softly, "Grant." He paused at the door. "Thank you for seeing me, not just believing me, but seeing me." He met her eyes, his smile quiet but certain. "You made that easier than you think." When he left, Claire sat a while longer, the late sunlight slipping through the blinds in soft stripes across her desk. She placed the letter beside her coffee mug and pinned a new note beneath the old one. Sometimes the latter finds its way back. She looked at the two pieces of paper, past and present, connected by a pushpin and time. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and breathed. Outside, the last of the snow melted into silver puddles, and somewhere, far above the noise of the city, the world shifted one quiet inch closer to kind. The following Saturday, Golden's downtown shimmered under strings of white lights, every lamppost wrapped in pine garland and quiet anticipation. The town's winter festival had always been small hot cocoa stands, fiddlers in wool hats, children darting through the glow like sparks. The air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Claire and Maddie strolled past the bookstore window, where paper snowflakes hung in uneven rows. Maddie carried a cup of cocoa, face sticky with whipped cream. "It's prettier this year," she said, tugging at Claire's sleeve. "Maybe you're just taller," Claire teased, brushing snow from her niece's hair. A familiar voice drifted from behind them. "Or maybe it's because you're both here." Grant Whitmore stood by the bench near the fountain, his breath fogging in the cold. He wore a navy coat this time. Simple, unassuming, no security detail, no sheen of the public man. Just Grant. Maddie grinned. "You're the fancy man from the gala." "Guilty," he said, smiling. "Though tonight I left the fancy part at home." He turned to Claire. "I thought I might borrow you both for a walk. There's a spot up by the river where the lights reflect like a second sky." Claire hesitated, but Maddie's hopeful look made the decision for her. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise to buy the cocoa this time." "Deal," he said, offering a mock salute. They walked the 2-mile stretch along Clear Creek, the path lit by lanterns strung low across branches. Maddie darted ahead, chasing the beam of her phone's flashlight, leaving the adults to fall into an easy, unhurried rhythm. The night felt simpler than either of them expected. They talked about small things, books, the weather, the way Denver snow always looked like it was thinking about falling, but never quite did. Somewhere in the middle of it, the heavy parts of their histories loosened, making space for something lighter. At the halfway point, near a bridge lined with wreaths, Maddie spotted a cocoa stand and ran ahead. "2 marshmallows." "Aunt Claire," she called. "2." Claire answered, smiling after her. When she turned back, Grant was watching, not staring, not weighing, just watching, as if the sight of her laughing had caught him off guard. He looked down, then said quietly, "You know, the night we met." I couldn't look away. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Flattery doesn't work on counselors." "It's not flattery," he said. "It's confession." His voice stayed even, but there was a gravity beneath it. I couldn't look away because for the first time in years, I saw someone who wasn't trying to be seen. You were just there, steady, self-contained, like the noise around you couldn't rewrite you. She blinked, not sure how to answer. "That's a rare compliment." "It's not a compliment," he said softly. "It's what I needed to remember existed." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was filled with understanding, with things they didn't have to name. Maddie returned, arms full of steaming cups. "They put cinnamon on top," she announced proudly. Grant took one, handing it to Claire. Their gloved fingers brushed, just enough to spark warmth through the chill. As they continued walking, Maddie skipped ahead again, humming something that sounded like hope. Claire glanced sideways at him. "You really are bad at small talk. You know that I'm worse at pretending," he said. She laughed softly. "Then let's not pretend." They stopped at a bend where the creek widened, reflecting the string lights from the bridge. The air smelled faintly of cocoa and pine. Maddie crouched by the railing, tossing pebbles into the water, counting the ripples. Grant turned toward Claire. "I don't know what this is yet," he said carefully. "But if there's a way to stay in your orbit as something true, I'd like to try." Claire studied him, her breath fogging between them. "You're used to fixing things with grand gestures, aren't you?" He smiled ruefully. "Guilty again." "Then hear my terms," she said. "No headlines, no rescuing, no foundation dinners for two. If you show up, you do it quietly. You show up at the small hours when the dishes are still in the sink, when the day's gone sideways. Or you don't show up at all." He took that in, eyes steady on hers. "No saving, no saving," she said. "Just staying." For a long moment, the wind carried only the sound of water moving under ice. Then Grant nodded, slow and certain. "Deal." She looked at him, searching for irony, but found none. Just calm. Just the kind of stillness that had been missing from her life for years. Maddie tugged at her sleeve. "Aunt Claire, make a wish." She pointed to the bridge where people were tossing pennies into the creek. Claire fished a coin from her pocket, feeling its weight for a second before flipping it into the air. It landed with a soft plink, rippling out beneath the lights. Grant tossed one too, wordlessly. "What did you wish for?" Maddie asked. He smiled down at her. "If I tell you, it won't come true." Claire shook her head, amused. "That's not how wishes work." "Maybe not," he said, his gaze lingering on her. "But this one doesn't need luck." They started back toward town, the lights ahead glowing warmer, closer. The crowd thinned, laughter trailing behind them. At the corner, Maddie spotted a friend and ran ahead again, leaving the two of them in the quiet halo of a lamppost. Grant turned to Claire one last time. "You know," he said, "you never told me what stay meant for you." She smiled, looking down at the little tin heart glinting against her scarf. "It means not running, even when every nerve tells you to. It means showing up, over and over, until the world notices you're still here." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll try to earn the right to say it, too." "No need," she said gently. "You already did the night you didn't let me walk away alone." The snow started again, faint and quiet, settling on the string lights until the whole street seemed dusted with memory. They stood there, side by side, no grand declarations, no kiss to seal anything, just two people who had finally learned that staying, really staying, was the most radical thing they could do. And as they walked toward the glow of downtown, Claire felt the word at her throat, the one stamped into the tin heart, the one she'd once whispered into a phone line to a stranger, echo back through the years, answered now by a voice that understood. Stay. This time, it sounded like a promise kept. 1 month later, winter lingered only in the shadows, thin crusts of snow clinging to curbs. The rest melted into the hopeful mud of early February. Inside a modest press room on the first floor of the Whitmore Foundation, A few dozen people gathered beneath soft lighting and the faint hum of camera equipment. No stage lights, no chandeliers, just a folding podium, a pot of coffee, and the quiet energy of something beginning. The sign behind the podium read simply, "The Stay Fund." Claire stood off to the side, a hand resting on the strap of her worn satchel. Her name wasn't on the banner. That had been her condition. But when Grant caught her eye across the room, the small smile they shared said, "Enough." He took the microphone, his voice steady. This program started as a conversation. He began, about what keeps people standing when life starts taking more than it gives. We realized it's often not a miracle that saves someone. It's a bus fare, a new pair of cleats, a ride to an interview, a jacket that fits the part. He paused, scanning the crowd. Teachers, social workers, a few local reporters, and several high school students invited to speak later. The Stay Fund exists to give those small ladders to people who need the next rung. Not the whole staircase, just enough to keep climbing. A soft murmur of approval passed through the room. Claire listened, her heart full and oddly calm. The phrasing, "the next rung," was exactly right. It felt like the thread of her letter had finally found its other end. When he stepped aside, the treasurer announced the initial round of donations. The largest check came from Valerie Rhodes. She walked to the front quietly. No entourage, no pearls today, only a dark wool coat and an expression that hovered between humility and self-awareness. "I don't have a speech," she said, handing the envelope to the moderator, "but I do have perspective. Consider this my way of climbing back up the right way." A few heads turned, surprised. There was no applause, but the silence felt respectful, the kind that acknowledges effort, even late in coming. Claire met Valerie's eyes as she walked past. For a heartbeat, the older woman stopped. "You're better at this than I ever was," she said softly. Claire smiled. "I had practice." Afterward, as the crowd dispersed into clusters of small talk, Grant found her by the coffee urn. He held 2 paper cups, steam curling between them. "You survived your first press event," he said. "I didn't speak. You didn't need to. It was your line that carried the day." She accepted the cup, smiling. "And yours that wrote the check. Fair trade," he said. Through the window behind them, the winter sun slanted across the city, washing the frost from parked cars and turning every puddle into a mirror. Students were gathered outside near the foundation steps, laughing, stamping their boots against the cold. One girl held a clipboard with a Stay Fund logo stickered in the corner. Grant nodded toward them. "First grants go out next week. Bus passes, uniform fees, a ride share for a kid who needs dialysis twice a week." Claire watched them, her throat tight with quiet pride. "It's strange," she said. "I spent years teaching kids that small steps matter. I never realized they could ripple this far." He glanced at her pendant, the tin heart gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. "You ever think that word chose you?" She laughed softly. "Sometimes I think it won't let me go." They stood for a while, watching sunlight creep down the opposite building until the window glass seemed to glow. The world outside looked unchanged. Traffic, cold wind, street noise, yet something in the air felt cleaner. Grant sipped his coffee, then said, "You know, I keep repeating that line you wrote, 'We don't have to fix the whole world today.'" Claire turned to him, the corner of her mouth lifting. "Then you know what comes next." He smiled, finishing the sentence with her. "Lower the ladder." Their voices overlapped, quiet but certain, like an agreement between equals. He looked at her for a long moment, then down at the coffee cooling in his hands. "Do you ever get tired of being the steady one all the time?" she said. "But I'd rather be steady than hollow." He nodded, understanding deeper than words. Outside, the students began stringing paper lanterns along the foundation steps, bright circles of color against the pale day. Claire stepped closer to the window, drawn to the scene. "Look at them," she murmured. "All that energy, all that beginning." Grant joined her, their reflections side by side in the glass. "They'll forget this speech by Monday," he said, "but maybe one of them will remember the feeling." "That's enough." Claire touched the pendant at her throat, the metal cool under her fingers. "Enough," she echoed. They didn't move for a long while, just watched as one of the lanterns slipped from its string and rolled into the street. A boy chased it, laughing, until the wind caught it again and lifted it briefly before setting it down. Grant glanced at her. You know, if someone had told me a year ago that a single sentence could rewrite an entire foundation, I'd have called them naive. Claire smiled. And now I call them right. The light outside brightened, dazzling across the window until all reflections disappeared and only the world beyond remained bright. Imperfect. Alive. Claire breathed in. The air filled with the faint scent of paper, coffee, and sunlight on melting snow. So, she said softly. What now? Grant turned toward her, that quiet humor back in his eyes. Now he said, we stay. The words hung there simple, earned, no longer a plea, but a choice. Outside, the laughter of students rose again, the city humming toward spring. Claire slipped the tin heart back beneath her blouse, feeling its steady weight against her skin. They stepped out into the cold together, faces lifted to the winter sun, breath mingling in the air. No fireworks, no grand finale, just two lives, side by side, still lowering ladders, still staying, and somewhere, maybe in a future they'd never see, a letter would be written by another hand, beginning with the same faith that had started it all. We don't have to fix the whole world today, but we can help someone climb. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in the pause between hurt and forgiveness, in the quiet space where someone chooses to stay instead of walking away. Claire and Grant's story wasn't about grand gestures or perfect endings. It was about two people meeting at the intersection of loss and courage, and realizing that kindness, the simple kind, offered without agenda, can rebuild what the world once broke. We spend so much of our lives trying to fix everything, to make the world right all at once. But maybe all we're ever meant to do is lower one ladder, extend one hand, say one word that reminds someone they still matter. Because the truth is, dignity doesn't come from being flawless. It comes from showing up again for others, and for ourselves even after we've been misunderstood, underestimated, or hurt. So if you're standing in your own winter, wondering whether to keep going, stay. The smallest act of grace can ripple farther than you'll ever see. And one day, maybe someone you've never met will whisper thank you because you stayed. Thank you for being here with us, for listening, feeling, and walking alongside this story. Every view, every quiet moment you spend here helps remind the world that kindness still matters. If this story touched something inside you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Each click, each share is more than support. It's a way of passing the light forward, one story at a time, because together we can keep telling the kind of stories that don't just entertain, they heal.